This Coach Human here for the Success for Life podcast. We're back, and I think it is now season 5. So this is my second guest in season 5. This year we've done a lot more of just me. I don't know if that's good or bad, but this is my second guest of season 5. I have Jodi Krangle with me, who is a voiceover actor expert. Has built quite a podcast following, teaching you how to become a voice actor and the subtleties of it. And she is one herself. Um, she is someone that has built a business, and we talk a lot about niche businesses on our Successful Life podcast and the ability to focus in a certain area and grow your business. And Jodi has done that. Welcome, Jodi, to Success for Life podcast.
Thanks for having me. Just to clarify, I'm not a coach. I don't coach people in voiceover. I do voiceover, but
Right.
I talk with a lot of people about it. Certainly I have clubhouse discussions on the subject, and I've been doing it a while, so I do have some interesting information that I could share. But I talk about audio branding a lot. That's my podcast, audio branding. So the power of sound. Basically, that sound should not be an afterthought in your productions.
Tell me, and I obviously we watch commercials, we see radio ad spots, we hear radio ad spots all day long. There's different sound components around us that are influencing our lives and on social media as well. All these different media platforms that utilize different variants of sound to get your attention, to get you to buy their products, to get you to listen to them.
Hmm.
Um, and it's one of these things that is so important. But I would say that a lot of times, especially in small businesses, we undervalue what that can really do for you from a promotional aspect. Tell me some of the things that you really like to articulate to people about the importance of sound.
Well, one of the reasons, or one of the ways that I articulate this is that I tell people what happens when they turn off the sound on a movie they're watching. So if you think about it, the way that people don't get scared in a horror movie if they're not really a horror fan is they turn off the sound. Think
Very,
about that, right?
yeah.
So the way to disconnect from a visual is to not listen while you're watching that visual. So therefore, the alternative is if you are using sound effectively, you can make an emotional context, an emotional connection, and give your audience emotional context for what they're watching. So it just makes a deeper impression. It lasts longer. That's what all advertising wants to do. It wants to be memorable. And you can't be memorable really unless you have some kind of emotional component behind that. And audio is the emotional component.
Music is utilized so much within, and you brought up horror films, right? How
Mm,
they changed the music, how they changed the mood. When you're watching a drama, the music that comes in the background.
yeah. The
Uh,
build up. Yeah. You know
right,
what's coming because of the music. Exactly. Yeah.
exactly. What are some of the things that people and I'm guessing that most of when you speak on your podcast about that, a lot of people that are going to be listening are people who own businesses or run businesses that are trying to figure out how to market better to
Hmm.
their customers, right? And to be able to tell a story properly utilizing sound, which is usually a business's hardest thing
It
because of
can
the
be.
fact,
Yeah.
yeah, because they don't understand, they understand how to market visually a lot of times. You could hire graphic designers you can articulate that vision to them.
Hmm.
You could get someone to pay someone to visually do that. But the art of sound and when to integrate it is a much more tricky thing. How the voices come across, what type of voice is reasonable to somebody who's on the other end that might buy your product. What How do you kind of gauge that and help people move in that right direction?
That's an interesting question, and I think that one of the first things people can keep in mind is what emotion do you want your company to evoke in your audience, in your client? What do you want them to feel when they see you, when they hear you. And I think the emotions are really what we need to be focusing on, because the emotion also is part of the visual. I mean, you chose your font, your colors, you chose the logo that you have for a reason, right? It's meant to evoke who you are in a split second. And audio does the same thing. It's a much more visceral, deeper connection than just looking at something. That's how we're built biologically as human beings. Evolution wise, we were meant to pay attention to the sounds around us because that could mean the difference between life and death. So it's important. And you're going to hear something way before you'll see it. So that's why that's so important. But it does make a very emotional, deep connection with us. So, yeah, think about that emotion that you want to evoke. And it's not just when you're thinking about music for your business, it's not just music you like. It should be also music that you know your target audience likes or listens to on a regular basis. The voice that is evoking what your company is all about should be maybe the voice of like someone who would be using your product or your service. So these are things to keep in mind, and it is very much emotional. It's very much creating that connection almost out of nothing, really, because people are experiencing your brand for the first time all the time. So you want to make sure that they all have the same impression, that you are actually portraying yourself as you are, because that inauthentic uh, connection will be found out in a heartbeat, especially now. And really the key word for everything that we've been doing since this whole pandemic started is
Right.
authenticity. Authenticity. You have to be yourself. And then that means that you may attract people, but you also may repel people. That's okay. Those aren't your people.
That's a really, really good point. Identifying that, like I remember this, and where are you based out of?
I'm north of Toronto, Canada, actually.
Okay, okay, Toronto, Canada. So I'm in the New York City area. Actually,
Okay.
now I live towards the beach area, but I'm
We're not
originally
that far away. Yeah.
yeah, originally from New York City area, in New Jersey,
Hmm.
and there used to be. It was one of the most memorable commercials, and this guy had the most memorable voice, but not necessarily because it was this great voice. It was because it was like, just like wild. So he
Hmm.
was called Crazy Eddie. He used to have all these electronic stores,
Okay.
okay?
Yeah.
And he had them all over the North Jersey area and in New York City. Eventually, he went out of business, but he grew incredibly quickly. At one point, it was during the whole electronics boom, and he had this like impactful, exciting, made like shopping for electronics like it was the greatest thing ever, you know.
Yeah.
And he had this ability to generate that excitement and what brought people into the stores. Um, how did and it's something that probably went against the grain in a sense, and then other people tried to copy it, but it went against the grain in the sense that you might not have first thought that this would be the kind of person to pitch your product. Um, but it ended working with his brand. This, Crazy Eddie's was the name of the place. He was
Sure.
crazy, and how important is matching up? And you talked about the audience, but matching up the voice to the audience, the personality to the audience, and how do you determine that?
I would say it's really important, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that perfect audio is good audio. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. If he believes in his product and he's willing to be crazy about it,
Right,
then I think that's what's making the connection with his audience. It doesn't matter what kind of voice he has. It really, honestly, doesn't even matter what kind of music he has on his spots. I
right,
mean, he is the brand of that company, right? So
right.
he's making that connection with people because he is all out. He is out there. He is ready to commit to what he's doing, and really that's everything. So if you are displaying your brand DNA in a way that seems completely authentic to the people that are hearing it and seeing it, then there's nothing that can stop you.
Absolutely, and the authenticity part is obviously a huge component. Two commercials that come to mind.
Hmm.
I don't know if he does them anymore, but Sam Elliott used to do do truck commercials.
Yeah, the Ford, right?
Yeah, Ford, I think it was.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
he was perfect.
I mean, yeah, like who else would you want to do truck commercials, right? And then
Yeah.
Matthew McConaughey's voice on the
Yes.
Lincoln cars, right? Like those
Yep.
were home runs. Just kind of the way they deliver their voice, matching it with the brand, their own brand. Like you hear Sam Elliott's voice, you've seen him in movies for years, in westerns
Yep.
and and tough guy roles and those kind of things. And then you hear that voice, especially as an adult, being 40 or above, and you've seen Sam Elliott act over and over again.
Sure.
Immediately there's a connection. Like every time I hear that commercial, not only does his voice is memorable, but also kind of soothes me. And like
Yeah.
it has that kind of almost that ASMR type thing
Yes.
going on for it. So
Definitely, yeah.
you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's so
And
interesting.
thank you for knowing what ASMR is, by the way. I appreciate that.
Tell people, I bet you a lot of people don't know what it is. Tell people what ASMR is.
Autonomous sensory meridian response. So that is the scientific name that they've come up with, but basically it's brain tingles. so so what it is if you're hearing a sound and maybe watching a visual at the same time, it kind of puts you into a meditative state. And there are all sorts of videos. If you look for ASMR on YouTube, you will find a ton of stuff. And everyone has different triggers. So
Right,
it's completely different for someone. Like someone will really like mouth noise and someone else will like be horrified by that sound.
right,
And some people will like to hear people scratching on or tapping on things. And some people are just, like it's so everyone's experience is completely different. For me, I really like whispering. I don't know what it
right.
is about that. And maybe like mic touching. Have you seen those? Like they
Yes,
scratch the
yes,
mic
yes, yes,
because it's like almost right in your ear.
yes. That's a very good point. I mean,
Yeah.
ASMR is so interesting because it's I've used it as a tool to like relax before I go to bed.
Yeah. I do the
And
same thing. Yeah,
yeah,
it's lessens anxiety. It's a really great way to do that. And there are some ASM artists who do really interesting things, like they dress up as characters and do, ASMR like performances. And there's a woman in France, I believe, who actually has like this thing for 18th century stuff. So she does hairstyles and dressmaking and steampunk eyeglass stuff. Like it's just really, really fascinating. And the sets on these are sometimes hugely elaborate. So
right.
yeah, it's amazing.
Do now obviously that's probably like a recently identified kind of, I don't know, would you say science or something? Uh, but it's obviously utilized. Like, I mean, I can't. My glaring example of a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you're going to agree with this, and I'm going in this direction. You might know where I'm going. Bob Ross. You remember
Oh
Bob?
yes. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
I must have been a teenager. I
Mm-hmm.
come from football practice. Obviously you probably did a little research. My business is in football, and the Success for Life podcast really started as a kind of thing for leadership and went in a whole different
Sure.
direction for business and stuff. But I'd come back from football practice in high school, and I would want to relax,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just literally Bob Ross would be on like a 5 or 5:30 or I remember what it was, maybe it was 6, get back, and I would just sit there and watch him paint.
Yeah.
And I would like it would calm me down and relax. Now, obviously, I didn't know at the time why that was doing that, but I
Yeah.
would say like that's probably an example of ASMR and also branding, right? Because you end up his voice was so impactful that you actually wanted to learn to paint because of
Yeah.
that. Like a big brute
Yeah.
like me wanted, was like interested in the aspects of painting. I would have never, and believe me, I don't have an artist bone in my body, so I would never have had an interest in it
Mm-hmm.
um, in till I listened to that, and that also enabled you to have not just a great voice experience, but the branding ended up becoming attached to it as well,
Yeah. Very
which
much
ended
so.
up becoming a it's still to this day, even though he's passed away,
Mm-hmm.
a business that has been wildly successful.
Yeah, and I remember watching those too. For me, it was on PBS, and
Yes.
we would get Buffalo stations. I grew up with Buffalo TV, so Cheektowaga and all of these places were burning a lot. I was I was seeing like the fire engines on these, like
Right.
the reports on the fire at
That's
way far
funny.
away from me, but yes, Tonawanda, yeah.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I did watch some of those as a kid, and actually, I watched a lot of the television on that station. And yeah, his voice was really, really soothing. But the way that I became more invested and interested in ASMR before any of like after that, but when I started my podcast, I went down the rabbit hole when I was researching an IKEA ad. So, IKEA, back in, I believe, 2016, put together an ASMR ad that was 28 minutes long or something like that. And it was for college kids who, at the time, were all into ASMR. And it was basically this young woman tapping. You'd never saw her at all you did was hear her voice, but you'd see her hand tapping on a lamp or moving over sheets, or whatever they were touting they were going to sell to these college kids for their
Right.
dorms, right? And
Right.
it was 25 to 30 minutes long, and I looked at this and I was like, what the heck is this? Because I had no idea what ASMR was at the time, and I was like flabbergasted. Why is she whispering? What is all this tapping? I don't understand. But it wasn't for me.
Right.
That's
Right.
the thing, right? So that was my first exposure to ASMR.
Hmm.
And when I did my deep dive to talk about this on the podcast, I learned more and I researched who the other ASM artists were and what they were doing and what different types of triggers there were and what advertising would use this for. Because a lot of my podcast talks about advertising, and I talk to ad creatives and people who have advertising agencies and video production companies and content creators who are looking for ways to make deeper connections with their clients. And I interview those people who are doing it. So it's an interesting aspect of the flip side of advertising, which is give them what they want, whether or not it's true advertising or not. Do you know what I mean? Like it approaches them on their level doing what they want you to do, but also has your product in it.
Is and I know we've got off on an ASMR little tangent here,
Yeah.
but I think it's incredibly like a lot of people don't know about it, and the people who do know about it.
Mhm.
But to me, it seems that that is going to become more and more of a important aspect of advertising and voice because the sounds that are utilized can lure you in
They
and
totally can, yeah.
get you to pay attention longer. Just like I use ASMR to relax myself,
Mhm.
but it lures me in, right? So now the next time I'm looking for the next thing, the next day or a couple days later, and well, I know I'm gonna go to this artist to get this thing. So
Mhm.
it's the same thing I think with products. Do you advise companies on this kind of a thing, or is it more like do you more interview people to really get the information as to what what can be done there?
Yeah, I more interview the people,
Yeah.
but I have interviewed a bunch of people who do audio branding as a profession. And I've
Mm,
interviewed people all over the world, from the US and Canada, from Europe, from India, uh, all over the place. So this is happening worldwide. People are becoming a lot more aware of how sound affects us. The simple matter is that in early days of advertising, all we paid attention to was the visual because the audio really wasn't all that well developed as far as technology was concerned. And so that's become like the whole Mad Men 50s era, right? That's
right.
become the go to So everyone knows about the visual aspect of this from all of that, but the audio was way less developed at that point, and even microphones were still being developed well, you know. So
Right.
there's a lot more that goes into sound and that can go into sound now that we have the technology for it.
Mm.
Surround sound, directed sound. If you're standing on a spot in the grocery store and that spot right above you, there's something that can put audio into your direction that no one else is hearing. You can direct sound. You can have it in a museum in specific places, the same way that I mentioned in the grocery store. You can listen to it in your own ears now through iHeart and Pandora and all of these other places, right? And it's much more personal these days. It's becoming very dynamic, so it switches with the situation, but it's also becoming much more personal so that each one of us can have our own sound system going at any time, right?
Right.
And that was not a thing back in the Mad Men days
Right.
at all.
Although before that, the Earl Nightingales of the world, um, before I would say, and you probably would agree with this, when TV
Mhm.
became a big thing visually, the audio part dropped for a little bit, and
Mm.
then now it's being reclaimed because of all the different technologies out. The microphone that you're sitting in front of, right, is a microphone that takes your fantastic voice and makes it a little more crisp, right? So right, so it's even better, and, but in the old days, before there was TV, you had the Earl Nightingales, the fireside chats, with Winston, during World War II with Winston Churchill, right? And
Well,
people,
yeah, but the only delivery was through radio, right? And
right?
radio
I
was
got
not
it. Yeah,
exactly the best
right,
audio.
right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So you had people making it. And
Okay,
I would never say that we didn't have any of it.
right,
When movies became talkies, right?
right, right.
But the sound quality and the things that you could do with the sound really didn't explode until, you're right, probably like after television had been on for a long time, for a while, because you had sets and movies that needed to develop this sound. So as movies got better, as television got better, and as our expectations got better, the sound has needed to follow suit.
Is this does the sound that we identify with is is this triggered from our brain, like what we connect with? And I mean, what is your opinion on that?
It's an interesting question. And on my podcast, the very first question that I ask people is, do you have a memory of early sound that impacted you? And I think every one of us has a different sound that is something you can remember from your childhood that really made a good impression on you. Or
Right,
or a bad impression. I
right.
mean, good or bad, it's something that's important in all our lives. I remember listening to older radio stations, and I had to listen to the radio to go to sleep. That was one of the things that as a kid, like 6 or something, I needed to hear the radio. That was comforting to me. And there was a radio station in Toronto that played, oldies, which is very old now.
Right. I know, like,
uh,
we used to listen to now oldies, I can't handle that, but anyway.
no, like they're calling 80s the oldies. I'm
Right.
like, oh
Yeah,
God, I feel old. Okay.
the same way. I'm the
But
same.
yeah, no, I'm talking about like Nat King Cole and that kind
Right.
of stuff, right? Like it was called 590 CKEY was the station. And I still remember the station because I listened to it every night for probably several years. And yeah, that music made such a big impression on me then. And my parents are very musical. So when we were kids, we had sing along time. We didn't have story time. So my dad played guitar, my mom sang. They're still alive, thankfully, so they're still doing this. But our family would gather and sing together before bedtime. So for me, audio, music, voice has always been a huge part of my life, and it always will be.
Tell me about your backstory. A lot of times I go to do it in the beginning, but as we started getting down this topic, I wanted to go into it first before I get to your backstory.
Sure.
How did you get into voice acting? And maybe it was from what we just started talking about right here with your family, but um, How did you get into it, and what excited you about it?
Well, that definitely did impress on me that voice was important and that that was kind of where my calling would be. But it took me a while to get there. And when I volunteered my time at the CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, I was reading articles onto reel to reel tape at the time. So this is 95 to 96. So I did that for about a year, and that was really how I learned that voiceover was even a thing because I didn't have any clue. It's
Yeah.
one of those things where you kind of don't know it exists unless you're really in the know. Do you know what I mean?
Right, absolutely.
And yeah, so the bug kind of bit then, but I didn't really get a chance to work on it until 2007. So I am always kind of both left and right brained. So I really like computers. And I've been a computer person since I got my first desktop computer in 1986. So DOS PC, I'm a PC person from way back. And I actually sold them for a little while in a store.
Interesting.
So yeah, that and software and all of that. So my early jobs were all in computers, and then when the internet happened, I got all into that. And I started a songwriting website called The Muse's Muse, which ran from 95 until 2016. It was actually a long, long time. And it couldn't expand past a certain way because social media came along and it was taking over everything. And I had a message board. I mean, like,
Right.
you know, like this wasn't going to be it wasn't going to be possible to be updated, and things like Mighty Networks and all of that things, they didn't exist just yet. And what was I going to do with this? And it was just a resource. There was tons of articles and columns on it and artist spotlights, and it had a radio show for a little while. It had a really popular message board, which I think is still going somewhere else. They just moved it to another website. Someone from that community took it over. So songwriters were connecting with each other on this website, and it started from like nothing, from like a simple HTML question that I put up on the internet. But promoting this, I learned internet marketing and SEO, search engine optimization. So that was what I was doing from about 95 until 2007. And when I got bored, and things tend to happen with me when I get bored,
Right.
I decided that I would switch my focus. So I was already self employed, probably from about the year 1999. And I decided that I was going to do something else because I was really bored and Google was the only game in town and I was pretty much done. And so I switched my focus. That was really all I did. And then I learned as much as I could. It probably took me around 2.5 years to make an actual living at voiceover. And I know some people take a lot longer than that. So, you know, this is not a immediate thing. You don't just get hired the minute that you put out your shingle, right? It's
Right.
you need coaching, you need a demo, you need a website, you need to know what genres you're really good at. You need to be comfortable in your own skin with your own voice. That is, you know, these are part of what it takes to actually be a success at this. And like I said, it took a while. So yeah, I'm still learning. I'm always learning. I just finished making a new demo for in-show narration. So I was having coaching sessions with a coach who's really good at this. And then I just finished the demo. It was just released maybe like a month ago. And yeah, I never stop learning. It's continual because the trends change.
What are some of the trends that are going on in sound and voice now?
Well, it's interesting how things changed during the pandemic because before the pandemic, it was really authentic, almost putting on nothing, really young voices. And great, you know, that there were a lot of those almost giving you nothing kind of I don't care if you do this, but fine if you want to, you know, that kind of attitude, right?
Right.
And it worked on a lot of athletic gear. It worked on a lot of sports stuff. It worked on a lot of really personal, meant for the younger audience type of stuff. Even the finance people were trying to get in on that, you know, like lots of other things were following that trend. And then the pandemic hit, and the trend started to go upward as far as age of the voices is concerned because comfort was really the main thing then, right? So people wanted to be comforted. They didn't want someone who didn't care. They wanted someone who did care. And luckily, I fit that trend.
Right. Well, your
So
voice definitely reflects that. There's no doubt about it.
we're coming out of it now. So I still do a lot of healthcare. I've always done a lot of healthcare. I do finance. I do tech. All of these kinds of genres, but I also do the happy furniture sales and clothing sales and stuff like that. Like that's fun and part of this as well. But yeah, they're starting to. I think they're starting to skew a little younger again. So it's a trend that goes up and down, and it's always changing, and it depends on the attitude of the public, really. What's popular
Right. What's popular at the time. The
and what we need, what we
right.
feel sonically that we need.
I think certain social media platforms leverage that well, and I'm curious what you think about. So, are you familiar with Clubhouse?
Oh, very much so. I have a weekly chat.
Okay. And are you familiar with Twitter Spaces at
Yeah.
all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Clubhouse, obviously during the pandemic, was what like just wildly popular, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Clubhouse is on everything and anything, and then Twitter Spaces kind of copied it. I don't know how popular it is or isn't. I mean, I've done a few Spaces, um, but obviously it's Clubhouse now that as we come out of the pandemic, Clubhouse has really dropped dramatically their audience. Spaces has increased. What are some of the things that you think are important for audio platforms like those to be successful to keeping and you it's great that you have your own thing on Clubhouse, so you could probably speak to this much more of what you see the advantages because I've always had Spaces for me has been better than Clubhouse. um I've been on a couple things, but um there's definitely a huge impact in those. People are still trying to figure out how do I utilize that to either build my business, my brand, whatever it is. What have you found has been successful, and which platform is better?
Well, I wouldn't actually say one is better than the other. I think
Okay,
it depends on what you're on. So
right.
if you're on Twitter all the time and you're seeing these Twitter spaces go by, I never see them. This is the problem, right? I
Mhm.
don't spend a whole lot of time on Twitter, so for me, I'll be there occasionally, but I won't really see Twitter spaces in my feed, and I don't know why. So I'm less there mainly because it's not in my face.
Right, right,
And Clubhouse for me just works because I can schedule things and I can add people as panelists and I can moderate and I can play an intro before my club starts. And I'm keeping to a certain topic. So my topic is the power of sound. And I talk about podcasting and music and healthcare, like music and healthcare, and sounds in movies and voiceovers and public speaking. Pardon me, and public speaking and all of that kind of thing, and storytelling and these kinds of things, all the things that audio evokes in our brains as topics that might be relevant. And it opens up so many opportunities for meeting really interesting people, which is what I love. So social audio in general, I think, is not going anywhere because I will say that I have been on social media for a long time and I've followed people for years. And having a 10-minute conversation with them in my clubhouse, I get to know them years better than I ever did while following their posts on Facebook or something. Like the power of the voice is something you really can't underestimate. And if that works for you on Twitter Spaces, great. If it works for you on Clubhouse, great. Like just however you need to do it, just do it because it makes a much deeper connection with whoever you're trying to communicate with.
right.
And I think that consistency is also really important. So what I do is I have a chat at 2 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday, and it's about something to do with sound. And people know that they can go to that location and I will be there. And that's really helpful for the general reason you would be using this. If you want to be available for people to question, for people to talk with, then consistency is going to be key as well.
Right. If you're not doing it consistently, it's not going to have the impact that you want. Very, very interesting stuff. I mean, definitely a top. I learned a ton today about the topic of sound.
I'm
What
glad.
what are kind of as a final question, and then I
Mhm.
want you to be able to share where everybody can reach you.
Sure.
Um, where do you see sound going, and what would you like to see happen?
That's a good question. And it's one I ask on my podcast a lot.
Okay, good.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking that sound is going to get even more dynamic and personal. So I think that sounds are going to be things that we can appreciate personally in our ears, in our environments. And I'm really hoping, and we've been talking about this subject for a lot now, so I kind of have my heart in this. As far as healthcare is concerned, the beeps in hospitals, when we are inundated with all of those sounds that don't need to be alarming but are, and they don't help our recovery. I'm thinking that hospitals and healthcare facilities and things like this really need to look at what their sound is. What's going on in their environment? And is that actually helpful to the people they're trying to make feel better? So I think that sound in healthcare has a long way to go. And I want to see that improve a lot. And specifically, I want to see it improve in hospitals.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, anytime anyone goes to a hospital, they fear fear is the biggest driver in a lot of
Definitely.
sounds, right? You hear the flatline sound,
Yeah.
I mean, that's fear. Your heart pulse rate when you're plugged into things.
Mm-hmm.
All these sounds are most of the sounds around healthcare are almost fearful sounds.
They are, yeah, and they don't have to be. I mean, there are some things that definitely need to be alarms, and I get that. But the amount of equipment that is in a hospital room now, as opposed to back in the 50s when they first came up with these sounds, is exponentially larger. So there's like so much more going on around you, and so many more of these machines making bad sound that are not helping you recover. And it's just I just think it's something that I mean, I don't know that the doctors and nurses and the people who work in the hospital are going to pay attention to this all that much because they're involved in it. They're in it. They need to know what these things mean, and I get it. So I think maybe someone outside of that needs to go in, look at this environment, and help people improve it for everyone's sake, not just the patients, but also the doctors and nurses and the janitors and like
Right,
everybody who works at the hospital because they're stressed out too.
right. That's true. And burning them out from
Oh yeah.
those sounds.
Yeah.
You
It's
hear this
important.
sound, oh, you hear this sound, oh, and you don't know eventually don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah. Now we're
Very in-
self-medicating with,
right,
our anxiety, we are
right,
self-medicating with ASMR, right?
right,
But what can you do in a hospital?
right.
Like if we can do that for ourselves over YouTube, can't they do something in a hospital environment where you'd think they'd know more?
That's a very, very good point. Yeah, I just think it's one of those things they've always done X, so this is why they do X.
Exactly. That's another reason why advertising is the way that it is right now. They've always done it that way, right? Mad Men, 50s, this, put this really catchy phrase and, have these dancing things going on the screen and like, yeah, get attention that way. But sound was never a thing, and it needs to be.
I don't think people pay attention to those things anymore, especially with so many advertising flying at you in so many different directions.
Definitely. And one of the other things that we need to realize is that sound can get into all of those little spaces in our lives now. Like we're multitasking all the time, right? So you listen to a podcast while you're doing the dishes or the laundry or something at home or while you're commuting to your job or whatever. You can listen and take in that information while you're doing that, and it fits into those spaces in your lives perfectly. You can't watch a video while you're driving your car.
Right.
Or you really shouldn't.
You shouldn't. I know. People probably do.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
Right.
so sound is just so much more easily accepted in our lives, and I don't think enough people make enough out of that.
Where do you think everything will start to go? I mean, what's the next direction?
Like I said, I think it'll become more personal. So
Customization?
yeah, definitely customization. Yeah. There was an app that won the International Sound Awards not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And it was a running app. And what it would do was it would take the sound of the song that you were listening to and it would increase with your pace. So
Mm.
it would give you more incentive to continue running or walking, whatever, by hearing in your ears that sound, that song increasing in pace. And the music itself was dynamic. So it was made to be that way. You could and it was like automatic. It would just happen as part of your pace. So things like that are incentive for us to keep doing good things,
Yes.
and these are important ways that we as human beings relate to the world around us. And I think that brands who understand that will use sound to make a whole sensory experience for their clients and their customers, as opposed to just inundating them with one and thinking that's the only thing they can do. And it makes that connection deeper, right?
Right. The deep connection, the customization
Hmm.
are the key components. Is this product or service or thing for me?
Yeah.
Right. And how does it affect me? Really great stuff. Wow. I mean, see, this is why I love this podcast because I learn about things that I never knew about before. So it's not just for the audience, as much as it's for the audience is as much for me as it is for them.
Oh, I'm
And that's
glad.
I think that's what makes it great is that it's a lot of things that I'm interested in that other people are interested in as well.
Hmm.
I can't thank you enough for being on. Tell the people out there where they can find you.
Sure. I am at voiceoversandvocals.com if they are interested in voiceovers. And my podcast is at audiobrandingpodcast.com if they want to learn more about the power of sound. And I am on Clubhouse every 2 p.m. on Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. And we discuss all things sound. So if someone has an expertise that they want to talk about, I'm always willing to do new topics. And we can talk from there. That and Thursdays at 2 p.m. actually, I have a room with a couple of my voiceover colleagues who also have podcasts, and we call it Voices in Podcasting VIP. So we talk at 2 p.m. Eastern again about voiceovers and podcasting and where they meet in between, and it's always a party, so anyone is welcome.
That's very good. You guys serving drinks?
I wish.
Bring your own. Bring your own.
Yeah, it's BYOB. Sorry.
Jodi, thanks so much for being on the Success for Life podcast.
Thanks
Really
for having
enjoyed
me.
the conversation. And we wish you the very best, and we'll have you on soon.
You too. Take care.
Thank you.